The event was a spectacle held in the heart of Beverly Hills, a gathering where the world's biggest stars collided. It wasn't just any ordinary party. It was a glamorous charity gala, a place where everyone who was anyone made their presence known. From movie stars to athletes, the guest list was filled with the biggest names in sports and entertainment. On one side of the room, people were chatting casually about recent games, while on the other, well-known faces were being photographed by eager photographers. It was impossible not to notice the electric atmosphere, the hum of excitement that filled the room. Guests in tailored suits and elegant gowns mingled with glasses of champagne in hand. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew that Tom Brady, the legendary quarterback, and LeBron James, the king of basketball, would be attending. The room buzzed with curiosity. What would happen if the two titans of sports crossed paths? The clock struck the hour, and the doors opened. First came LeBron James, his tall figure immediately drawing attention. As he entered, a hush fell over the crowd. The flashing cameras seemed to multiply, capturing every moment of his arrival. LeBron smiled as he walked through the room, greeting familiar faces and shaking hands. He was the life of the party, his presence commanding the space. Everyone who was anyone knew how important this was. LeBron had arrived. Soon after, Tom Brady made his entrance. Dressed in his signature suit, his confident stride instantly caught the eyes of many. As he moved deeper into the room, conversations shifted. A few guests exchanged glances, whispering to one another about the encounter everyone had been waiting for. Tom and LeBron in the same room. The two giants of sport were about to face each other. But then something strange happened. As LeBron approached, Tom glanced up. LeBron extended his hand in a friendly gesture, his eyes full of respect. But instead of stopping to greet him, Tom simply looked past him. Without missing a beat, he kept walking, moving toward a different group. It wasn't a glance filled with disdain or anger, but it wasn't the warm handshake everyone had expected either. It was almost as though LeBron didn't even exist in that moment. LeBron paused, his arms still extended for a brief second before lowering it. He stood still for a moment, his expression unreadable. The room, once filled with laughter and conversation, seemed to hold its breath. Whispers spread like wildfire, with people wondering what had just happened. Had there been some sort of misunderstanding, or was there something more to this cold exchange? It wasn't the moment anyone had imagined, but it was one that would soon be all over the internet. The silence between the two had been deafening, and the tension was about to make its way into the viral spotlight. After the awkward exchange between Tom Brady and LeBron James, the room was filled with a quiet tension that no one could ignore. Guests went back to their conversations, but the energy had shifted. The high-pitched chatter and laughter from earlier seemed to fade as people tried to make sense of what had just happened. It wasn't just an uncomfortable moment, it was something deeper, something that had happened between two giants of the sports world, and no one quite understood why. LeBron, still standing for a moment with his hand lowered, took a deep breath. He smiled as if nothing had happened and moved on, trying to shake off the moment. But even in the silence that followed, it was clear that the whole room was watching. The crowd was now waiting for Tom Brady's next move. Everyone expected him to acknowledge the awkwardness, to make a gesture, to somehow make it right. But he didn't. Brady moved through the room with his usual calm, his eyes scanning the crowd, seemingly unfazed. He chatted with a few familiar faces, giving the impression that the earlier moment didn't bother him at all. Yet, those who knew him could tell there was something different about his demeanor. His usual cool and confident presence felt like it had a slight edge to it, as if he was deliberately avoiding something or someone. The event carried on, but it felt like all eyes were on the two men. LeBron, who had once spoken openly about respecting Brady's achievements, was now left to deal with the cold shoulder. He laughed and talked with other guests, but it was clear that the interaction with Brady had shaken him. He was the type of person who prided himself on being able to stay composed, but even he couldn't hide the subtle confusion in his eyes. As the night went on, the situation began to spiral in a different direction. What had been an innocent moment between two athletes became something much bigger. People who had witnessed the exchange began discussing it, not just with each other, but on social media. Soon, it became the subject of everyone's conversation. A fan account posted a video of the moment, highlighting the brief glance between the two, and added the caption, "Brady just ignored LeBron. What's going on?" The video quickly went viral, gaining millions of views. Twitter, Instagram, and even news outlets picked up the story. Fans flooded the comment sections with their thoughts. Some defended Brady, claiming that maybe it was a simple misunderstanding. Others sided with LeBron, wondering why Tom had acted that way. A few speculated about a deeper tension between the two. Was there something that had happened behind the scenes that no one knew about? The incident quickly became one of the biggest talking points in the sports world. Some people couldn't believe it, while others felt like they had witnessed a glimpse of something more personal. The whispers didn't stop. The world now had its eyes on Tom Brady and LeBron James, and the tension between them was only beginning to unfold. While the public reacted to the viral moment between Tom Brady and LeBron James, there was a lot happening behind the scenes that the world didn't see. Many fans and commentators were quick to jump to conclusions, but only a few truly understood the complicated history between the two athletes. It wasn't just the brief exchange at the gala that created the tension. This cold moment was the result of months, maybe even years, of quiet competition, unspoken rivalries, and subtle jabs. Although the two had never openly fought, there were signs that things weren't as smooth as the public imagined. Tom Brady, known for his unshakable focus and drive, had always been a figure who believed in constant improvement, no matter how many championships he won. His success wasn't just about being the best on the field. It was about proving himself over and over again. He admired athletes who pushed their limits, just like he did. But when LeBron entered the conversation about greatest athletes of all time, Tom began to feel a little uncomfortable. In one interview, LeBron had said, "I'm not just here to be the greatest in basketball. I want to be the best athlete, period. That means competing at the highest level, no matter what." To many, it sounded like a simple statement of ambition, but to Brady, it felt like a challenge. LeBron's confidence in his own greatness seemed to hint at a kind of supremacy that could overshadow Brady's accomplishments in other sports. The two men's paths had crossed countless times, but this one comment had stuck with Tom. On the other hand, LeBron had always looked up to Brady. For years, he admired Brady's work ethic, his dedication to his team, and his ability to win under pressure. However, LeBron had never been shy about sharing his own thoughts on what made him different. He often talked about his ability to change the game, both on and off the court. And when it came to the idea of greatness, LeBron made it clear he wasn't content with just being one of the best in his sport. He wanted to change the world. But there was a moment a few months before the gala that made things even more complicated. During an interview, LeBron spoke about the changing nature of sports in the modern era. "The game is different now," he said. "It's not just about playing hard. It's about how you market yourself and create a legacy." It was clear that LeBron believed his influence went beyond just basketball, something Brady had been cautious about discussing. Brady believed in playing the game for the love of it, not just for the fame or the brand. And as both athletes built their legacies, it became harder to ignore the underlying tension. As the gala drew closer, these thoughts sat heavy on Brady's mind. He wasn't the type to let personal feelings interfere with his work, but when he saw LeBron in person that night, those quiet disagreements came to the surface. Maybe it was the history of their competition, or maybe it was the weight of their unspoken rivalry. But in that brief moment, Brady's decision was made. He would remain distant. It wasn't a decision to insult LeBron. It was just his way of dealing with the tension that had been building for so long. And in the end, the world would never fully understand why Brady ignored LeBron at the event. but those who followed their careers closely knew there was more beneath the surface. As the night unfolded, the tension between Tom Brady and LeBron James was palpable, but there was one person who noticed something that others didn't. Thiago Brady, Tom's son, was attending the gala with his father that evening. While the adults discussed business and sports, Thiago was quietly observing everything around him. Only 10 years old, Thiago wasn't yet fully aware of the weight carried by his father's legendary career, but he could still sense when things felt a little off. After the awkward moment between Brady and LeBron, Thiago, sitting quietly next to his father, couldn't help but notice the change in the room. The energy was different now. People were still mingling, but there was an underlying question hanging in the air. Why did Tom ignore LeBron? Thiago knew his dad was focused, always had been, but even he could tell that the situation had made things uncomfortable. He turned to his father, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Dad," he said, his voice soft, "why didn't you talk to LeBron? You two are both really good at what you do, right?" Tom looked at his son, a small smile appearing on his face. He was used to being asked questions, but this one seemed different. It wasn't the usual "how did you win the game?" or "what was it like to play in the Super Bowl?" Thiago's question was more about what was happening in that moment, something more personal. Tom paused for a moment, taking in his son's innocent question. He didn't want to get into the complexities of sports rivalries with Thiago just yet, but he also didn't want to give the impression that there was something wrong. "LeBron's a great player," Tom replied slowly, trying to choose his words carefully. "But sometimes people don't always get along. It's not always easy to explain why." Thiago nodded, but he wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. He could tell that his father was holding something back. He'd seen Tom face challenges on the field, handle pressure in games, and deal with difficult situations. But this was different. Thiago didn't understand why his dad, who always seemed calm and collected, had acted this way towards someone who was clearly a big deal in the sports world. As the night continued, Thiago couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than just a missed handshake. He overheard a few conversations from nearby tables, snippets of people discussing the tension between Tom and LeBron. Some speculated about rivalry, others mentioned past interviews, and some even made jokes. Thiago felt a little confused, but was also strangely fascinated by the idea of a rivalry between two people he admired. Maybe it's just part of being the best, Thiago thought to himself. Maybe they both want to be number one. And that's okay. He didn't fully understand all of it, but he began to realize that even the greatest athletes, the ones who seemed untouchable, could have moments where they didn't get along. What seemed like a small moment of tension at the gala was, in reality, a reflection of something bigger, something that went beyond the surface of what the public saw. And so, as the night wore on, Thiago quietly observed his father. Even though he was still young, he was beginning to learn that the world of sports was more complicated than it appeared. Later that night, as the event began to wind down, the atmosphere had shifted. People were still talking, but the excitement had faded a little. Many guests had already left, and others were gathered in small groups, chatting about everything from the charity cause to the game highlights. It was clear that the earlier tension between Tom Brady and LeBron James had become the unofficial topic of the evening. It wasn't just a missed handshake anymore. It was the moment that everyone was talking about. Meanwhile, Tom Brady was trying his best to remain composed. He was surrounded by a few close friends and colleagues, discussing various matters, but his mind kept drifting back to the awkwardness that had unfolded with LeBron. He hadn't intended for things to go that way. He had never been one to make a scene or cause unnecessary drama, yet that moment seemed to have stirred something he hadn't expected. But no matter how hard he tried to push it aside, the situation lingered. As the evening dragged on, Thiago noticed that his father seemed lost in thought, staring into the distance. His gaze wasn't focused on any particular person or thing. It was as if his mind was elsewhere, processing something that was bothering him. Thiago, ever observant, couldn't help but feel concerned. He'd seen his father go through plenty of intense situations on the field, but this was different. The usual calm demeanor wasn't there. Instead, there was a quiet tension that was hard to miss. Sitting next to his dad, Thiago hesitated for a moment, not entirely sure how to approach the subject again. But after a few seconds of thinking, he decided to speak up. "Dad, you didn't seem happy when you saw LeBron earlier. Are you okay?" Tom looked at him, surprised by the question, but his son's innocent curiosity made him pause. Thiago had always been the type to ask questions without any agenda, just a genuine desire to understand the world around him. Tom took a deep breath and looked down at his son, trying to find the right words. "Yeah, I'm okay, buddy," Tom said slowly. "Sometimes there are things you don't always see, things that go on behind the scenes." He smiled, but it wasn't his usual confident smile. It was more of a thoughtful, almost tired expression. "Sometimes you don't get along with everyone, even if they're really good at what they do. And that's okay. We all have our different ways of doing things." Thiago nodded, though he still didn't fully understand. He wasn't used to seeing his dad act this way. He had always admired how Tom seemed so in control, so sure of himself. Now, Thiago was starting to realize that even the strongest people had their moments of doubt and frustration. Without missing a beat, Thiago did something that took his father by surprise. He grabbed Tom's phone, unlocked it, and quickly found LeBron's number. "You should call him," Thiago said, his voice full of determination. "You guys are both the best at what you do. You should talk. Maybe you can figure it out." Tom chuckled, surprised by his son's boldness. It was typical of Thiago to approach problems with a fresh perspective, one that was free of the baggage that adults often carried. For a moment, Tom considered the idea. Maybe Thiago was right. Maybe a simple conversation was all it would take to clear the air. But before he could make the decision, the moment passed. The evening was almost over, and guests were slowly leaving. Still, Thiago's words stayed with him. "Sometimes, the people around you see things more clearly than you do yourself." The following days after the gala were filled with a sense of calm, but Tom Brady couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled within him. It was the kind of feeling that lingered quietly in the back of his mind, no matter how busy his schedule became. From morning workouts to meetings with his team, there was a part of him that kept thinking about the cold moment with LeBron. His son, Thiago, had asked him to call LeBron and make things right. Tom wasn't sure if that was the right move, but the thought kept coming back to him. Brady prided himself on staying focused on what mattered most, the game. But now, a question had emerged that he couldn't ignore. Was this really just about sports? Was this something bigger than a moment of tension at a gala? It wasn't just a handshake or a missed greeting. It was a reflection of something deeper between two athletes who had dominated their respective fields for years. There were things that had been left unsaid, things that Tom hadn't quite been ready to face. One morning, as Tom sat at the breakfast table, looking over his phone, a message popped up on the screen. It was from an old friend, a former teammate who had always been a source of support for him. The message read, "Heard about what happened with LeBron. Just wanted to say, don't let that stuff get to you. People love to create stories. It's part of being in the spotlight." Tom stared at the message for a moment, his fingers hovering over the screen. It was easy to get caught up in the noise, to let the opinions of others sway his thinking. But deep down, he knew that the tension wasn't just about how others saw it. It was about him, and how he saw himself in relation to the world around him. As he sipped his coffee, he thought back to his own journey, how he had climbed from being a seventh-round draft pick to one of the most successful athletes in history. It wasn't just about being the best. It was about proving to himself, year after year, that he could overcome every obstacle. Tom had always kept his emotions in check, focusing on his performance rather than what was happening outside the game. But now he felt like there was something about LeBron's presence in his world that had been challenging this sense of control. LeBron had always been someone who embraced the spotlight. He had built his legacy not only through his talent, but by using his platform to influence the world. Tom, on the other hand, had always kept his personal life private, focusing instead on his on-field achievements. The differences in their approaches had never been so apparent until that awkward moment at the gala. Tom wondered if LeBron's openness had somehow challenged his own way of doing things, making him feel less certain about his own approach to greatness. But as the hours passed, Tom realized that this wasn't something he could avoid. The tension between them needed to be addressed, not for the sake of public image, but for his own peace of mind. Maybe it wasn't about calling LeBron or having a big conversation. Maybe it was about finding a way to let go of the unspoken rivalry and accepting that both of them had their own paths to greatness. With a deep breath, Tom made a decision. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding that sometimes, even the best of rivals needed to find a way to respect one another. A few days after his quiet reflection, Tom Brady found himself at another event. A charity dinner this time, but this one felt different. The atmosphere was warm, with people mingling, talking about everything from sports to business. It was one of those events where the spotlight wasn't just on the athletes, but on everyone coming together for a cause. But despite the friendly environment, Tom couldn't ignore the sense of anticipation building up within him. He had been thinking about the moment with LeBron at the gala for days, wondering if it was something that he could just let go of, or if it needed to be addressed. The more he reflected, the more he realized that it wasn't just about the tension between them. It was about how he wanted to move forward in his own career and perhaps his own life. As Tom walked through the event hall, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, his eyes scanned the room. That's when he saw him, LeBron James, standing with a small group of people, his smile as wide as ever. It was almost as if the tension from their last encounter never existed. But for Tom, it felt like a door that had yet to be opened. He couldn't avoid it anymore. He knew he had to make a decision. Without thinking too much, Tom walked over to where LeBron was. The closer he got, the more his heart raced. But when he reached LeBron, something unexpected happened. Instead of the coldness that had defined their previous meeting, LeBron smiled warmly at him. "Hey, Tom," LeBron said, his voice friendly. "How've you been?" Tom, surprised by LeBron's approach, took a deep breath and smiled back. "I've been good. It's been a busy few weeks." For a moment, the two men stood there, their eyes meeting, but there was no animosity, no tension, just the simple acknowledgement of two people who had been at the top of their game for so long. "Look, about the other night," LeBron said, breaking the silence. "I wasn't sure what happened, but I don't want any bad blood between us. We've both done a lot for sports, and I think we both know how hard it is to maintain that level of excellence. It's not easy." Tom nodded, appreciating the sincerity in LeBron's words. It was rare for someone in their position to step forward and speak so openly, especially after a moment like the one at the gala. He had been expecting more of a formal apology or a stilted conversation, but this felt different. LeBron wasn't just trying to smooth things over. He was being real, just like Tom would have been if the roles were reversed. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it too," Tom replied. "It's not always easy to put things in perspective, especially when you're always striving for more. But I respect everything you've done, LeBron. You've pushed the game in ways I didn't think were possible." The conversation wasn't long, but it was meaningful. In that short exchange, the air between them seemed to clear. They didn't need to say everything. There was a mutual understanding now that hadn't been there before. They didn't have to agree on everything, but they both recognized the effort and drive it took to be where they were. As the night went on, Tom felt a sense of relief. The tension he had been carrying seemed to slip away. Sometimes, all it took was a few honest words to clear the air. And while their rivalry would always exist in some form, it was no longer something that needed to weigh on them. For Tom Brady, this was more than just a meeting with LeBron James. It was a reminder that even the greatest competitors could find common ground when they looked past the surface. The days after the conversation between Tom Brady and LeBron James felt lighter for both of them. The small, quiet moment at the charity dinner had cleared the air in a way neither of them had expected. Tom Brady, who was always so focused on the game and his own legacy, realized that sometimes it wasn't just about the next championship or the next big play. It was about the relationships you build along the way. For LeBron, the exchange had been just as important. He had always been open about his ambitions, but in that moment, he saw something in Tom that he hadn't noticed before. They were both driven by a need to be the best, to push the limits of what was possible, but there was a mutual respect now that hadn't been there before. It was a quiet understanding, one built on years of hard work and dedication. They weren't just competitors anymore. They were two people who knew what it meant to sacrifice everything for something bigger than themselves. In the weeks that followed, the media picked up on the change. Rumors about their rivalry began to quiet, replaced by stories of their respectful conversation. Fans, who had long enjoyed the spectacle of their competition, seemed to appreciate this new chapter even more. It wasn't about the drama or the headlines anymore. It was about two legends finding a way to coexist in a world where competition often overshadowed everything else. Tom continued his training, as always, but with a new sense of peace. He no longer felt the need to prove himself to anyone. He had already done more than most could ever dream of. Now, it was about finding balance, about enjoying the game for what it was, not just as a path to victory. And while the game was still his priority, he found himself reflecting more often on the connections he had made along the way. The people who had been there for him, even in the toughest moments. For LeBron, things were also different. The pressure to always be at the top had never gone away, but now there was a clarity in how he approached his career. He had always known the importance of influence, not just on the court, but off it as well. The conversation with Tom reminded him of the power of mutual respect. It wasn't just about being the greatest in the game. It was about making sure that greatness meant something. He wanted to be remembered not only for his achievements, but also for how he treated others along the way. As time went on, their paths crossed less frequently, but there was always an unspoken understanding. They didn't need to be friends to respect each other. They had found a way to acknowledge each other's greatness without the need for conflict or rivalry, and that, in many ways, was the true mark of respect, knowing that competition could exist alongside admiration. At the end of it all, what mattered was that Tom and LeBron had learned something important. It wasn't about who was better. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about the journey, the struggle, and the quiet moments that allowed them to see the bigger picture. And in the end, both of them knew that the respect they had for each other was the most important victory of all.